Hi, everyone. I would like actually to thank you for being today with us and following this webinar. My name is Nikos Panagiotou. I am an associate professor at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Greece, School of Journalism, and also director of the Digital Communication Network Hub at Southeast Europe. We want to thank you for being here today with us for the first virtual event organized from the Digital Communication Network Southeast Europe Hub that is headquartered in Thessaloniki, Greece. The webinar is arranged jointly by our hub, DCN, and World Learning Digital Communication Network, which is actually a coalition of digital influencers for improving the information space, and is supported by the US Department of State from the Office of Citizen Exchanges. Regarding the DCN Southeast Europe Hub, I would actually like to start by showing you what it is and what we are actually doing and working on the subject. Digital Southeastern Europe Hub has been created recently. It is actually a coalition between a Digital Communication Network, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and a lot of private organizations. The aim actually of Digital Communication Network is to promote digital dialogues and actually to promote research and innovation in issues related with digital communication. It is an open coalition and an open effort in order to promote transparency in what we are doing. So by saying that, I would actually like to remind you that this event is the first of a series of other events that we will organize. The second webinar that we will organize, it will take place on Thursday at 5 o'clock Greek time. And then the next one, it will be on April 6th. It is, as I mentioned before, a part of a series of webinars that aims to intrigue dialogue regarding important issues and especially things that matter to us, and especially what matters digital communities globally, in order to promote accurate information, combat distortions, encourage responsible behavior, and discourage panic and support mitigation of a global pandemic and avoid major social disruptions. Today, our topic is fake news and disinformation during public health crisis, and our special focus is upon COVID-19. Before we start, I would just like to introduce also Franak Viacorka, which will be a co-moderator with me and the speaker of this event, Franak. And
hi, everyone.
Okay, and each speaker, I will give you just some hints of how the meeting will go on today. Each speaker will present his or her approach. I just want to remind you that whatever a speaker says represents him doesn't represent and reflect our organization. And then we will have a round of discussion and questions that will follow up. So before starting, I would like actually to ask you to submit your opinion in our poll. Franak, do you want to take over with a poll?
Yes, sure. So now you can see on your screens the questions. So the first question is, what are your main source of information regarding COVID-19? So I guess you can vote and we can see your results. So just don't hesitate to submit your answers. If you don't see, just let us know in chat, okay? Because we are testing this technology for the first time. Do you see the poll?
At the right bottom of your screen, there is the polling where you actually vote. And so in order to, because we want to listen to your opinion and what you have to say regarding this issue. So the first question is, what are the sources of your information? What are your main sources of information regarding COVID-19? Is it mass media, social media, experts, or relatives? And then the second question, it is, what are the main sources of disinformation regarding COVID-19? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it anti-establishment movements? Is it an anti-vaccination movements? Is it, are the democratic governments? Are the media responsible for that? Also, as soon as you will actually respond to the poll, we will have an overview and actually your opinions regarding what are the sources of information, both as a main source and also as a main source of this information. Can you all see the poll? Okay. Having said that, and in order to open, yes?
Oh, do you see the results? Because my screen doesn't show any results here.
No, I cannot see the results, but probably they have been infected by the coronavirus. So,
oh yeah, that's a very popular explanation.
Exactly. And it's a kind of, we will see about what we have voted. Having said that, I would like actually to, yes, Franak?
I think we can continue, and the poll will continue, and we will try to summarize in the end.
Exactly. I will just, before passing the floor to our speakers, whom I really thank for being here today with us, I would just like to start our meeting by showing this data journalism actually reporting from New York Times, where they discuss how the virus got out. So it seems simple: stop travel, stop the virus. Here is why it didn't work. Our first case actually started from in Wuhan in China. So tens of thousands passed through Hankou train station every day, and this is where the sea market was, the seafood market. 4 cases on to the usual treatment. But the true size of outbreak was actually much larger, even then, an invisible actually network of nearly 1,000 cases, or perhaps several times more. With each patient infecting 2 or 3 others, you can understand why actually these have gotten out of hand. But the main thing is that Chinese officials did not alert the public to the risks in December. It wasn't until December 31 that they alerted the World Health Organization and released a statement and the reassurance that the disease is preventable and controllable. But the timing of the outbreak could not have been worse. Hundreds of million people were about to travel back to their hometowns for the Lunar New Year. And here's how actually people moved around January 1st, according to a time analysis. At least 175,000 people left Wuhan just on that day, as they have found from their research. The departures from Wuhan accelerated over the next 3 weeks. So this reached about 7 million people that left in January before actually travel was restricted. Thousands of travelers were infected. With the red dots, actually, you can see the representation of those ones that were infected. By the time actually the first local outbreaks were already seeded in Beijing, Shanghai, and other major cities. 2 days later, the authorities locked down Wuhan and many cities following the next few weeks. Travel across China nearly stopped, but local outbreaks were already growing quickly. As the outbreak moved across China in early January, International travel continued as normal, and thousands of people flew out of Wuhan to cities around the world. Over 900 people went to New York every month, 2,200 to Sydney, and over 15,000 people went to Bangkok, the most popular actually destination among the Chinese tourists. That's where actually the first known overseas case appeared in mid-January, a 61-year-old woman who traveled from Wuhan to Bangkok, despite actually having a fever and all these symptoms of the disease. Other irregular cases turned up in Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul, and all across other Asian cities. About 85% of infected travelers went undetected, researchers believe, but they were still contagious. So it was only at the end of January that Wuhan was placed under lockdown. And by January 31st, the United States announced that it would shut down every entry from China from non-Americans. But it was outbreaks well rapidly growing in over 30 cities across 26 countries, most seeded by travelers from Wuhan. The virus started spreading locally, and that was actually the start of the pandemic. By saying that, I would like to pass over the floor to Bethany Allen, which is actually our first speaker. Bethany, thank you very much for being here with us. Bethany works for Axios, and she's actually specialized in covering issues regarding China. Bethany, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be able to speak alongside my other co-panelists today. So I'm going to talk about how China has presented the coronavirus and specifically its role in the coronavirus. We need to go back a little bit to last year. So starting in around October, the Chinese government at somewhere, some decision was made that it was time for Chinese diplomats to start getting verified accounts on Twitter. Prior to October 2019, there were only around 40 verified Chinese government accounts for ambassadors, diplomats, and embassies and consulates around the world. From October to December 2019, that number grew to over 100. Now, Twitter is a platform that's blocked in China, and the Chinese government has obviously mostly ignored it. This happened before the coronavirus. Starting in January, after the cover-up, the official cover-up basically ended, and the Chinese government started talking a lot more about the coronavirus and about what it meant. We saw at first some two main narratives start to emerge from official Chinese government spokespeople, from state media, and those two narratives were, first of all, China's response, China's very excellent and controlled response to the coronavirus has bought the world time. We have done the world a favor. We are sacrificing ourselves and shutting down our citizens and their movement as a favor to the world. So that was a first kind of narrative. That's a very traditional kind of Chinese government propaganda, because what it tries to do is to cast the Chinese government in a positive light and to cast China in a positive light, creating a single narrative that doesn't try to split other countries. It doesn't target foreign societies. It's just about the Chinese government. But we also, starting in late January and early February, I think it was actually early February, started seeing a little bit of another, just a seed of another narrative. And that was, for example, when one of the top Chinese epidemiologists who has been in charge of the outbreaks suggested that maybe the virus didn't come from Wuhan. They said, well, we're not sure where it started. And so they were starting to cast doubt on the fact that it came from Wuhan. The first epidemic was in Wuhan. That very quickly developed into what we now have been seeing for the past several weeks, which is truly a departure from any kind of Chinese government messaging that we've seen in a very, very long time. And that is we are seeing multiple conflicting conspiracy theories backed by no evidence at all being promoted by Chinese government verified Twitter accounts and amplified by state media. And the first big pusher of one of these conspiracy theories was Zhao Lijian, who for a long time was a diplomat in Pakistan and was recently promoted to deputy spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. And he started tweeting that the coronavirus maybe could have originated from the US military, which planted it purposefully in Wuhan. This is an obvious conspiracy theory. There's no epidemiologist, no credible, respected epidemiologist in the world who believes or has suggested that the virus shows signs of any kind of engineering or manipulation. That is just not how this virus came to be. But he pushed that pretty hard. And then you started seeing other verified accounts tweeting that, pushing that. And then we started seeing conflicting conspiracy theories. So someone, jumping onto this quote from an Italian doctor to suggest that the virus started in Italy, and several other theories. And so what you have for the first time in decades is a top-down obvious disinformation strategy that involves pushing conspiracy theories. It's the first time that we have seen China emulating Russia's strategy. Now, Russian strategy is much more well-known right now in terms of disinformation, and their playbook is multiple conflicting conspiracy theories pushed by government accounts aimed at creating confusion, at destabilizing the information environment so that the very nature of truth becomes controversial. And it's also aimed at creating discord in target societies abroad. And this strategy now being adopted by the Chinese government is doing that as well. It's saying, look, nobody knows. Nobody really knows where this virus came from. It definitely, maybe probably wasn't China, but nobody knows. That's the first time we've seen that kind, because traditionally Chinese government propaganda does exactly the opposite. Through censorship and propaganda, it traditionally aims at creating a single immutable narrative, and this is the opposite of that. And it also seeks to cast blame on foreign governments, whether that's the US government or maybe Italy, criticizing another country, and creating a sense of doubt about what anyone can believe. So I think I've about run on my time limit there, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bethany, for giving us an overview actually and regarding how the situation started, and especially the efforts for disinformation from the Chinese side. Having said that, I would like to pass on our next speaker, Thomas Miller, which is a professor, adjunct lecturer at George Washington University in the States. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning to people in the States, and good afternoon and evening to those across the pond. I'd like to thank you, Nico, and others for organizing this great initiative. What I want to do is approach the COVID-19 issue from a strategic narrative point of view. And basically, the strategic narrative approach tries to leverage existing narratives to get people to do something. In this case, it would be to follow practices which will stop the spread of COVID-19. Now, there's a lot of disinformation out there, obviously, about COVID-19, and Bethany mentioned some of the narratives. One is that China introduced COVID-19 as a way to sabotage the West or population control. Another narrative is that young people really are not affected by this. This is coming out of sort of the populist wing, which will be the focus of my talk today. In fact, there was a pastor arrested yesterday who had a large congregation and had welcomed people, saying that people who stay home are pansies, basically. Another narrative out there is that the COVID-19 is exaggerated by Democrats in order to harm the administration, or that the director of the Institute for Infectious Allergy and Infectious Diseases has is trying to institute a police state like China. So these are some of the, there are a lot of narratives out there. So what I want to do today is talk about how we can address them in a way which doesn't do more harm than good. And in order to do that, I'd like to talk about some of the popular narratives in the populist wing. I think we all know that populism arose as a reaction against the establishment. They see the establishment as supporting the elite in their own interests, promoting the globalization system, which has left them behind, encouraging China, which has taken millions of jobs. These are all their narratives. And in fact, the establishment has promoted the growth of China, which has become a superpower rival. And it's common knowledge now that most of the medicines produced and used in the States come from China. Another narrative of the populist wing is that they're tied to place. They're tied to community and family. They're more traditional. And so they see a lot of the elite narratives as harming them, and in fact, not really very wise at all. For example, the establishment of both parties has led to disasters in Iraq, Afghanistan, the failed policy to start to launch a democracy in the Middle East, etc. Just one final narrative I will mention, because we don't have much time, is the populists see themselves as the losers in the cultural war. They believe that the values of the establishment are being basically shoved down their throat, that the academic, science, government, and media wing, these are what Rush Limbaugh, a very famous broadcaster, calls the four corners of deceit, that they are more concerned with virtue signaling and political correctness than in actually solving real problems. So how can we address some of these narratives without doing more harm than good? The first thing I would recommend is don't get distracted. One of the very common approaches of disinformation is to distract and pull attention away from what's really going on. In this case, I think not all narratives are equally important to address. For example, the fact that some people say the coronavirus was created intentionally by China, I don't think is as important for protecting the health of the community as the fact that young people need not worry, or that the threat is exaggerated by Democrats. That's something which really could cause harm. Another recommendation I would make is not address the issue in a way that threatens the identity of the other side. It's common knowledge that populists also are willing to accept new research if it doesn't challenge their identity. So everybody accepts the fact that smoking causes cancer or that alcohol impedes driving. But when it comes to climate change, they're much less likely to accept that fact. So now we have a big debate whether calling this the China virus is racist. And so this falls right into the narrative of the establishment seeing everything through the prism of race and not trying to solve real problems. In fact, when President Trump closed the borders to China, that was labeled as racist also. So I think what we really have to do is avoid this issue becoming a partisan issue. The issue of the China virus, if that leads to discrimination, is certainly important. I think that we need to try to tap the local narratives. For example, if populists see family and community as all important, we could talk about this as protecting your family, your father, your mother, etc. If they view local people as having more credibility than national, try to leverage local audiences or people who have local credibility. I know it's very hard for people to retweet people who are on the other side of our partisan divide. But if somebody is saying, like a conservative senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, if he's saying very useful things about the coronavirus, why not retweet him to get our message across? And the final recommendation I would say is that since we're limiting freedoms in so many drastic ways, one possible solution is to deplatform. Alex Jones for Information Wars yesterday was removed from global stores because his platform was promoting a lot of conspiracy theories about COVID-19. So if we're limiting freedoms in so many ways, the freedom for people to propagate conspiracy theories might need to be limited as well. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your comments and your valuable thoughts as well, and for being here with us in order to discuss these issues. I would like now to move to our next speaker, which is actually Lukas Andriukaitis from DFR Digital Forensic Lab, part of Atlantic Council, which supports actually the initiative of the Hub as well, and Anna Pellegata. Lukas, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me just quickly share my screen. Here we go. So hello, everyone. My name is Lukas Andriukaitis. I'm an associate director, and I wanted to present you a bit of how the DFR lab is dealing with the current disinformation problems when it comes to coronavirus. As you might have heard, the DFR lab is dealing specifically with open source approaches to disinformation, and one of the best tools that we have currently to fight and to trace disinformation campaigns when it comes to coronaviruses are social media listening tools. So some of you might have used them. These are the main ones that we use: Meltwater Explorer, Brandwatch, CrowdTangle, and Busmo. There are many more alternatives, but basically they allow you to use certain keywords and to find how messages spread and which ones are the most shared and who shared them and so on and so on. So currently we're doing a lot of work on different topics, but me personally focusing a lot on Kremlin and Russian disinformation. We've been working on Italian case and how Russian disinformation is affecting that country. Since Italy has been hit really hard by coronavirus, Kremlin is trying to exploit the current situation and promoting their own agenda. So we see that it's happening mostly in two ways: to achieve foreign influence, so basically achieve information agenda push in Italy, in Europe, basically in the Western world, and also domestic influence to use the problems that are happening to form some narratives in the domestic Russian language speaking sphere. So I would like to present four cases, very short, but also four approaches that pro-Kremlin propaganda is using in this case. I'm pretty sure that similar approaches are being used by local domestic actors, by China and other malicious actors in the information space. So the first one is spinning stories. What pro-Kremlin is very useful, pro-Kremlin media outlets and actors are very good at doing is taking a story that actually happened, slightly adjusting it, and giving it another life on the information space. So this month, in March 14th, 15th, US Air Force flew 500,000 of test swabs for coronavirus back to United States from Italy. They bought 500,000 of them in the local companies and flew them back home. 2 days later, we started seeing on Russian, on Montenegrin, and other media outlets that United States is taking away tests from Italy and from Europe in general. So basically, these small stories were supporting a bigger narrative that the US is stealing taking away, robbing from people in need, from Europeans, from Italians, even from Lithuanians and other Baltic people, the death swabs that they actually really need at the moment. So the story was slightly adjusted based on real events. The second thing that they like to do is recycling stories. We noticed this also this month, that a few narratives that were promoted in Italy in Italian language by local actors, criticizing the Defense 20 exercise of NATO, questioning why United States, 40,000 United States troops are coming to Europe when the pandemic is at large, was taken by Russian social media actors and just blatantly translated word by word and recycled for another life. This happened, as you see, in 3 days, more or less from March 13th, when the first messages appeared in Italian. On March 16th, they appeared on Russian, word by word, and they've been pushed for another life of these messages. The third one is making up stories. These are just blatant lies, but pro-Kremlin media outlets are very good at it. So basically, they accuse Poland for not letting their humanitarian aid planes through the Polish airspace. So these messages were received quite well in Italian. Some Italian readers and social media users started amplifying some of these messages. And the same happened in Russian. As you can see, the 3 keywords that we used, Polsha nie propustila, collected over 3 million impressions on their local, on Russian-speaking environment. So basically, they managed to do quite a big impact. Interestingly enough, a small detail: Sputnik Italia published the fake story, and then after a few days, they put an update. But basically, they managed to garner most of their engagements in the first days when they actually spread this information. And the last one is using favorable stories. A few actors in Italy have, actually only one gentleman that you see in the picture, changed the European Union flag into a Russian flag and made a video, which got a lot of likes on local social media between users. Russians took this as a big story, saying that Italians are changing European Union flags into Russian flags in big numbers. So imagine one article in Russian managed to get close to 100,000 engagements on social media. So that would be about it. If you would like to follow more of our work, please use this link, and I will post our latest research in the Zoom chat very soon. I'll be very interested to hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lukas, for the interesting presentation and highlighting examples of disinformation that circulate around the web, and especially in these times when we have to deal with the pandemic. Just before I pass the floor to our next speaker, I would like, actually, because Bethany has to leave the meeting because she will have to go to another webinar, and actually pass the floor to Bethany in order to respond to some questions that we have received regarding her presentation. Bethany?
Great, thank you. So there's a couple of questions that have been asked, and the first one is, can you explain more about the unidentified government accounts in Twitter? So in my presentation, I talked about the official verified accounts that we know belong to Chinese diplomats and other official government accounts. But there are many accounts that are not officially linked to the Chinese government. And there has been actually very timely an incredible investigation by ProPublica that was just published last week, in which they revealed more than 10,000 pro-China accounts on Twitter that are bots or some other kind of inauthentic account that have, it's a network that has been built up on Twitter for years through a combination of different methods. But these accounts can be mobilized for any kind of messaging or, the amplification of any kind of message that the Chinese government wants. And so what we've seen is last year it was used a lot for messaging about the Hong Kong protests. So amplifying messages that were supportive of Hong Kong police, that cast Hong Kong protesters as violent thugs who aren't grateful, stuff like this. And of course, this huge bot network has also been now used for coronavirus messaging to help amplify some of these narratives coming from the Chinese government, whether that's that China has done a great job. It's bot time for the West. It's some of these more positive ones, but also the ones that are critical of the U.S. or amplifying some of these different conspiracy theories. A lot of this is still happening in Chinese, so it's not necessarily. Certainly not all of this is focused at, say, an American audience. A lot of it is focused still at trying to control the opinions and the loyalties, if you will, of Chinese people who are abroad in whatever target society that they're in. But we do also see, there was just a report a couple of days ago from Italy that a hashtag that was, it was something like, Italian Chinese solidarity or something. Actually, more than 40% of the tweets that used that hashtag were bots. So there are efforts by accounts on whose links to the Chinese government or to other governments are unclear, right? But are probably linked, are also trying to affect the opinions inside these target societies. And then there was one more question, which was, is the relatively small number of deaths in China part of the government propaganda? Great question. I will say that right now, we don't know. There is an enormous amount of speculation right now about the data that's coming out of China regarding the total number of coronavirus cases and the total number of deaths. And that speculation has really reached a kind of a fever pitch, I would say. But I have not seen to date sufficient evidence to say that those numbers, those statistics are being purposefully changed or altered by the Chinese government for propaganda purposes. I don't know, and no one really knows right now. It's clear that what we do know, for example, is that the way that the Chinese government has chosen to tabulate its statistics is that it doesn't count cases that are asymptomatic. Is that a purposeful way they're trying to keep their numbers low, or is that just how they, in their public health approach, decided to tabulate it? I don't know. There was a report from Radio Free Asia earlier this week or maybe last week about perhaps there were many more deaths in Wuhan than were being reported. But that's also, it's circumstantial. We just don't know. I do think that we will know. I do think it will become clear if there has been a massive top-down, approach from Beijing to try to hide cases. I believe that we will find out. We just don't know yet. And I'll leave it at that. And I do need to head out, but in a couple minutes. But it was really great being here. And please feel free to contact me. If you're in the audience and you have more questions. You can find me on Twitter, or you can search my name and find my email. Happy to speak with you further.
Thank you, Bethany, for accepting the invitation and being with us. If you have just a second, there is another question, whether the Chinese people are buying all that disinformation regarding the source of the virus that you mentioned before. It is from Diego.
I'm sure some people are. I think it's a range. It is very clear that there is in China an enormous sense of anger and distrust of the government because of the early cover-up. I mean, that is so clear. And a lot of what we see coming, the international propaganda campaign and disinformation campaign by the Chinese government, by the Chinese Communist Party, a lot of that is actually aimed internally. to try to take pressure off of the intense criticism that many Chinese people have levied at the government and the amount of distrust that this has caused. It's very clear that the Communist Party views this as a potential challenge to their very legitimacy, and rightly so. If they had not been able to get the epidemic under a large degree of control, if hundreds of thousands or millions of Chinese people had died, I think they would have a very, very significant governance crisis on their hands, and they know it. And it is not possible that, a bunch of Weibo tweets and state media, happy state media headlines has erased that sense of distrust from a great portion of Chinese society. Are there people who are willing to believe that this is the fault of the CIA or the US military? Absolutely. So there's a range of opinion.
Thank you, Bethany, very much for being here with us and sharing your thoughts and your approaches and your experience actually on the issue. Hopefully we are gonna host you in another event, and thank you for being with us.
I would love that.
Having said that, thank you, Bethany. All the best. Enjoy the day and be safe actually. And having said that, I would like to pass the floor to Joan Mower, which is Director of Training and Development of United States Agency for Global Media. Joan, thank you for being here with us.
Hi, is everybody hearing it okay? Seem to have some
everything
problems.
is clear.
You can hear? Okay, good. Well, I'm not going to actually go present PowerPoint slides at this point. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about what the US government's media operations are doing in the fight against disinformation and some of the challenges that government-funded media face in covering the story. And I will just note that U.S.AGM, U.S. Agency for Global Media, where I work, is funded by the U.S. government. But our news operations, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting Network, are independent. There is a firewall between our government and our journalists. So while we are state media in one sense, we are also extremely sensitive to being to not being told how to cover the story. So I would say that we're doing a number of things. We have a number of sites. One, the Voice of America has something called Polygraph, which is a fact-checking site. And they've done a terrific job, not just of covering disinformation from Russia and China, but also fact-checking some of the claims that have been made by US officials. So they've looked very carefully at some of the press conferences that President Trump has had. They've fact-checked some of those, and they've done a really good job, I think, of trying to sort the chaff from the straw, which is quite difficult. I will say that there's so much confusing information in our country right now. One current example being on the use of masks. Whether or not Americans should be using face masks, or whether it was just a campaign to get Americans not to buy face masks that started out telling people don't use them. So that's an issue. I mean, the facts are often very confusing for people. So it's hard to really get, what's disinformation and what's not. On the taking on Russian and Chinese disinformation, Bethany mentioned an incredible story that Radio Free Asia did. I urge people to Google that. I can also put that up. But they went to Wuhan and they were able to interview people at crematoriums, at funeral houses. They went to cemeteries. They did an amazing job of on-the-ground reporting with local reporters who work for them, checking out these facts. And so while Bethany is correct, these are not official facts. It looks very, it looks pretty suspicious that these numbers were so low in the death count in Wuhan based on this story. I will add that Voice of America has also been extremely concerned about the Chinese decision to expel American reporters, including our reporters, reporters from Wall Street Journal, New York Times, other major outlets. That has really been quite a crackdown. And it's also a story that that our media is following which is the attacks on journalists. There have been at least about 24 attacks from at least 10, 12 countries in which journalists have been harassed for covering COVID. In some cases, like South Africa, it's now become a crime to quote, publish fake news, whatever that is. In Hungary, the prime minister has taken total control of his country over this. So there's another element to this story, which I think for journalists is extremely important, which is have there been attacks on reporters who are trying to get the correct news out there? Finally, I'll just say that Radio Free Europe has a site called, they have a program called Current Time. They also have a daily digest in which they put out all of the disinformation stories that they have compiled during that day, and all of the stories that they're reporting on COVID. So I'll leave it at that. I think Bethany summed it up very well. It's a confusing situation. The American paid media, the government paid media is trying to sort through it. I think our sites are very good, but I think it is still a moving target in so many ways. And thank you, Nikos, for hosting this. It's been very interesting.
Thank you, Joan, for your kind words and also giving another perspective in what it seems up until now, very interesting discussion as well. Now I would like to pass the floor to our next guest speaker and thank him also for being here with us and sharing his valuable experience and work. It is Thanos Sitistas. He is a fact checker from Ellinika Hoaxes, which is a fact-checking organization in Greece that is doing a great job in order to reveal disinformation and actually highlight fake news cases. Thanos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nikos, and thank you all for attending. A few words about Greece and coronavirus disinformation and misinformation. Greece is experiencing two kinds of fake news about the coronavirus pandemic. First of all, we have conspiracy theories that proliferate mostly through social media. The most popular conspiracy theory is the alleged man-made origin of the new coronavirus. Some claim that it was created as a bioweapon either by the United States or by China. Some others claim that it was created by the New World Order or various institutions like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, either as a means to control the population or decrease the population, among others by imposing mandatory vaccinations. The other major issue with fake news regarding COVID-19 has to do with unsubstantiated medical advice. For instance, for shielding from the coronavirus or curing it or whatever. Those posts and the conspiracy theories have great virality. We haven't seen anything like that before. Last but not least, we have also witnessed disinformation coming from Russia and China. Their rhetoric revolves around the debunked notion that COVID-19 is a bioweapon. Also, their narrative amplifies the so-called insufficiencies of the West in general in showing true solidarity, especially towards Italy or Spain. Coronavirus has inspired countless wild stories about its origin, its effects, and its cure. In my opinion, the reason for that is because this pandemic is something new and has a few unknown parameters. It's a complex phenomenon. No one can deny that. As of yet, there is no cure and there is no vaccine. So people are anxious and want quick answers to difficult questions. Therefore, a conspiracy theory about its origin or its cure is an easy way out from this predicament. So people tend to believe them. As for some fake medical claims that we've seen in Greece and pretty much everywhere else around the globe, we've seen people claiming that gargling vinegar and salt will prevent coronavirus, using onions, using all sorts of alternative medicine and food supplements like vitamin C. Also, a very dangerous claim, in my opinion, is the notion that it's just another flu. It's nothing serious. We've seen some pretty crazy claims, like a viral claim that smoking protects from infection. To recap, coronavirus misinformation and disinformation has added considerable confusion to an already uncertain situation, and it's continuing to multiply. So I will leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Thanos, for presenting your work and actually what the whole team of Ellinika Hoaxes have found circulating in the internet in Greece, actually in the public sphere regarding this major issue. What is important is that we could see actually some similarities that circulate both our public sphere in Europe in general and in other countries and continents also. And now I will pass the floor to our co-moderator and co-host actually, Franak Viacorka. Franak.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this wonderful panel. It's very interesting. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, good.
We clearly hear
Okay,
you.
so I think I'm based now in the country, the only one country in Europe which doesn't recognize the existence of the virus and of the pandemic. I am in Belarus and Minsk, and Lukashenko, as every dictator perhaps in this world, decided that the global crisis is also the opportunity, is also the chance for him. And I will show you a few slides I have prepared. Let me jump here. Yep. So basically for Lukashenko, the situation is not the threat, it's not the risk, it's an opportunity. And he's very openly, similar to Brazilian President Bolsonaro, is openly opposing the threat itself. So he also believes that it's not just the situation when everyone must be helpful and solidarity is the only solution here. He believes it's a competition. And this is why from the very beginning, he was trying to hide the real results, the real situation with a number of diseased and infected people in Belarus. And also he said that we all have already here the recipe, how to heal and how to cure the virus. So this is one of his interview. So he quoted the revolutionaries of Mexico from 20th century, and he said it's better to die standing than to live on knees. So he basically tried to compare himself with a sole lonely hero who is still keeping this unequal fight. And he says that the problem is not the pandemic itself, the problem is the psychosis. And he used this psychosis many, many times. He says that not the virus, which is killing people, but the psychosis, which is created by global conspiracy around the situation itself. Many experts compare this attitude and this behavior to Chernobyl. I think many of you watched the Chernobyl TV show, and you remember this moment when the doctor says that 3 and 6, not great, not terrible. This is something we hear in Belarus every day. Not great, not terrible. Yes, it kills people. Yes, Italy is in the disaster. But for now in Belarus, it's only 150 something infected. Not great, not terrible. And he tried to repeat this narrative, not just to avoid potential panic, but in order to save and to give him some time from economical crisis. He says that for Belarus, not the virus is a problem, but economical crisis which comes with the crisis. This is why he refused to announce quarantine. This is why he still continues football national tournament, and Belarus is only one national competition which is still played in the world. And yesterday, you see the pictures on the left. Yesterday, I left my apartment. I'm self-quarantined, and I saw many kids going to circus centrally from their schools. So there are major fakes, and these fakes are created by dictator himself. So first of all, it's not the pandemic, but the psychosis, and media create the psychosis, and we shouldn't find the solution or treatment. We should stop the media and Telegram channels who spread the psychosis. So COVID is not a problem because we cannot see it. You say, I don't see any viruses, you cannot see any viruses, so they don't exist. It's also very similar to Chernobyl situation. He also shared his ideas how to heal, how to cure, tractor, work in the field, sauna, vodka, but all of these are very well-known fakes. And he also expressed some kind of geopolitical, historical narrative. He said that this virus will not take us because we lost many people in the Second World War, which is nonsense. But where to read truth? There are still few sources of information, of real information about the situation with the COVID in Belarus. First of all, Telegram channels and people who are working in clinics, people in provinces and regions, they are sending user-generated content, pictures, numbers to media and influencers. There are some media outlets that are sharing news despite the threat and alert from KGB and Lukashenko, and of course YouTube bloggers and influencers. These are channels of information, and the main goal and the main task for traditional journalists and for fact checkers is to gather this huge amount of information, thousands of pieces of information, and to check it. So in time of crisis, which we observe right now, the mission of journalists is the same, but the way we implement this mission is different. Now we don't produce content, but we have to repack this content, to check this content, and to make this content accessible and available to the larger population. So I will stop here, and I think we can pass to the discussion.
Exactly, and thank you, Franak. But before passing on the discussion, just like to sum up what we have discussed up until now. Thank you, all of you that participates. We have over 125 participants, and we have a lot of questions in order to share it with our speakers. But before doing that, let us see the results poll. In the beginning, we asked you actually to vote regarding what are your main sources of information. And actually, those, Franak, do you want to present the results?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for voting. The first question was, what are your main source of information regarding COVID-19? And we see almost 46% voted that mass media, 30% that social media, and 24% are experts. And the second question was a bit opposite. What are the main sources of disinformation regarding COVID-19? And here we see that media are still disinforming, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, but media have huge responsibility on the narratives, on the ideas, on the perception of the virus, and how to fight it. But on the second place, we see Russia as the source of this information, and the problem with Russia is that Russia was well prepared a long time before the virus happened. And all these networks of channels, of groups, of communities created by RT and RT-related outlets and organizations, they were weaponized and mobilized when COVID happened.
Great. Okay, now we will pass on in the discussion part of our meeting today of this webinar. In order to just give you some hints, we as a university and as a hub, actually, we have conducted a survey among the Greek public opinion, how they're being informed during this crisis. The results are pretty similar as the one that we have found here. So it's what we have seen, that during crisis, people tend to be informed and to rely much more on professional media. In this poll, we didn't list social media as an external factor because we included them in the term of media, but also we wanted actually to emphasize on whom do we see as actors of this kind of disinformation, as Franak have mentioned. So in order to open the floor to questions, I have gathered some questions. One comes from Tiffany from Economist Foundation. So the question is like, many people have it can't hurt attitude to spreading unproven or checked information about ways to tackle the virus. What are the implications of this attitude, you think? I will start with Lukas. I will post actually the question here. Many people have an it can't hurt attitude to spreading unproven or checked information about ways to tackle the virus. What are the implications of this attitude? I will start with Lukas and then move on to our next speakers. Lukas?
Sure, that's a good question. And it applies not only to COVID case, but to many cases when it comes to disinformation. The main problem with this approach is that if you post such statements on your private, as a citizen on your private Facebook profile, for example, you might start discussions with friends of yours, and it creates a sort of human contact, which can be more convincing than reading something, for example, on news media outlet, right? So if you say something that you don't know if it's true, it's for your followers or for your colleagues online might be more convincing than reading it online. So it's problematic, and I would recommend everyone from refraining to post anything that is unconfirmed, and be very, very careful with their online activity, because this is one of the main ways how conspiracy theories spread, because usually you just trust a person who you read it from.
Okay, thank you. Thanos? I just started actually asking the question to the fact-checking organization, and then we'll move on. Thanos?
Can you repeat the question, Nikos?
The question is been written in the chat. So the question is actually, it says that many people have it can't hurt attitude to spreading unproven or checked information about ways to tackle the virus. What are the implications of this attitude from the public?
Right, so let's assume that a claim goes viral on Facebook saying that if you gargle vinegar and salt, you won't get the coronavirus. Let's say that it gets 5,000 shares. Theoretically, you have 5,000 people who will think that they are immune to the coronavirus. So if those people go out and take no precaution, theoretically, they can spread the virus to an unlimited amount of people. Therefore, it's very important that everyone gets the right information.
Okay. Thank you, Thanos. Because Thomas will have to leave us for a web meeting commitment, Thomas, if you can answer the following question, I will jump a question. what is the role of, what is the power of religion as an institution? Because you made this very interesting discussion about organization, movements, etc., in distribution of fake news regarding this case. Do you think that it has a role, I mean, the religious institution in your strategic communication example that you have mentioned? Is Thomas with us?
I'm with you. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you see the document that I shared?
Yes. Yes, yes, Thomas. Yes.
Okay, so what I think is that we need to look at the voices which are amplified in the local communities, and of course the church is one of them. And we tend to focus on the stories of pastors who are telling people to keep coming to church, and then it makes a great story. But I'm not sure if that is exactly the whole story, because I think there are a lot of religious leaders who are telling people to stay home, but that doesn't hit the news values of the exceptional and the surprising and what leads bleeds. And so I think that one of the ways to solve that is to find credible religious leaders who will amplify the message that you want to. And I would, somebody has to do a study on this, but there are certainly a lot of them. And this is a way to get the desired message out through credible voices.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for being here with us and actually being part of this discussion. We're looking forward to have you again in our future webinars.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let me move on. Thank you, Thomas.
There is
Thank you very much.
Yes. There is question from Christos
Smilianis. Also, do you want to take it over, Franak? As citizens, how can we assist our societies?
As citizens, how can we assist our societies in building resilience to the misinformation and disinformation? Does it actually help informing and sharing checked information? Is there anything more to do? I think this question to all speakers of today. Anyone wants to start?
Just one thing. Check your
facts.
The answer is check your facts. It's everyone's responsibility to check their facts before sharing or distributing any kind of information. It's as simple as that.
Lukas?
Okay, Lukas.
Yeah, there's a very good example from my home country, Lithuania, where a bunch of activists have started creating a couple of groups when it comes to coronavirus information, and everything they post there can be considered reliable because it's full of fact checkers, and the community is growing very fast now. I think they have like 30,000 or so people on it, and basically it is a place on Facebook where you can come and get the latest information and can be sure that it's true, because there's a bunch of fact checkers who check every fact and check all the comments that no misinformation could be spread. So it's like a safe space for this kind of information.
Thank you, Lukas. We have a question. Joan, do you want to take it?
Yes.
Joan, unmute. Yeah, now we hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
The first thing is on religion. Actually, in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, the very first case of coronavirus was a man who is a very prominent Episcopal minister. And as a result of he contracted the disease, and 550 of his parishioners who had gone to communion on that Sunday had to self-quarantine. They included some of the most prominent people in Washington, including the top person at the Washington Post. And I think that this actually helped Washingtonians and the mayor of Washington focus on the fact that this was a really serious issue very, very early on. So that was a case in which religion actually, in a funny way, helped sensitize people to this situation. And just on the case of bad information, I think that what we're seeing across the board, and maybe less so in America, is when you have journalists who are not trained in specific areas, when you have people who don't know what a virus and a bacteria is, when you don't understand the scientific literature of health, this is the kind of problems that you have, bad information. And this is a call, my agency and Franak, you know this well, we have a huge push to try to do health reporting around the world. So I would really urge, and there's a number of people who are getting into this world, but it's incredibly important that journalists actually be trained as scientific health experts when they're trying to communicate this information.
Thank you, Joan. Just I'm jumping over regarding a question that has been posed regarding except propaganda from government. This comes from Alexandros. From governments, how the scientific literacy and even the inability of journalists to properly inform the people has contributed to the crisis. This is actually what Joan have mentioned, that it is, among other things, it is upon the journalist duty or necessity to be informed about producing and promoting a scientific literacy. And this results from a research that we have done in Greece, and we have published an article with our team regarding the necessity for the journalists to be trained in scientific literacy issues as a way to combat this kind of disinformation. Let's move on to the next questions. Franak, do you want to take it over?
We have one video question from Arlinda Shehu. Arlinda, are you ready to speak?
Yeah. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes,
we hear you.
Okay, so talking about fake news, actually in Albania we have a lot of that problem with social media, many, because as you may have heard before, last year we had a fight with our primer about fake news and how the state must control media, etc., etc. But actually about COVID-19 and the health crisis, the main problem is that there are a lot of media and social media particularly that are seeing the situation on how to use it to earn more clicks, which means more money from people. So a lot of news. Sorry, because I entered a bit late and maybe you have talked about this before, so I'm not really sure. But anyway, I mentioned people are reading a lot of how they can fight COVID-19 through garlic, through walking, through going in the sun, and other things that, yes, they are not scientifically true. At least when we consult with official sources such as World Health Organizations or other pages. At our organization, which has 4 online portals and 3 of them are health portals, we are communicating with the official resources, and actually we have even supported the Ministry of Health, Albanian Ministry of Health, and asked them to send us all the official information that they have and that they would like to share. It's a bit difficult because when you are fighting for the first news, sometimes even as a journalist, we make mistakes, but actually we're trying to be the second and to be true in what we're writing, and trying to, yes, to not, it's not the time for the big news. Actually is the time to not make the people panic and for them to understand which is the right information, safe and accurate information. So this is on our part what we are trying.
Thank you.
This is a very crucial point because yes, and it relates also. I'm sorry, it relates also with a question that we have received from Indonesia, why actually the journalists don't emphasize not only panicking people, but also on the positive news. So it clearly highlights the necessity to spread over actually even positive, a more positive approach.
If I can add, we have to remind ourselves that a lot of owners of media are businessmen. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's not only the fault of the journalists, but really they are a lot pressured from the newsrooms. Because I'm talking here where I am because the media I represent is a media that is managed by an NGO. So we don't have an owner who is pressing us for the first news and for a big news. You know, but in general, not only in Albania, but all over, we know that a lot of owners of media, they see media as business.
They work for profit. Thank you, Arlinda, for your comment. So that's very useful and relevant to all of us. I think we have to finalize the discussion for today because it's already 1 hour and 15 minutes. Any closing remarks, Nikos?
Yes, I would actually like to thank you. Some questions have been not responded. Let me just mention them really quick in order just to have 1 minute per speaker response. So one question is, how can we be certain that these theories are nothing more than conspiracies? What about corona disinformation from Iran? And what do you suggest in order to face or to decrease at least disinformation and misinformation to the public? I would like a very quick comment from all of our speakers, from Lukas, from Thanos, and Joan as well, in order then to finalize our meeting today. Lukas?
So just to close up.
There is one question about corona disinformation from Iran. The other one is about how can we be certain that these theories are nothing more than conspiracies? And what do you suggest in order to face or to decrease at least disinformation and misinformation to the public?
Well, we haven't, in the FR Lab, we haven't seen a whole lot coming from Iran right now, so I will refrain from commenting on that. How to be certain? I guess the people who should we be talking to are medics, and we should trust more in medics. And coming back to my example that I mentioned from Lithuania, I think this could be a response from the civil society for local journalists and for local activists to join in Facebook groups or other groups, maybe on Twitter or any other social platform that is popular in your respective countries. Add some medics to it, add some well-known doctors who are trusted by the public, and try to form these information safe spaces where people could easily come and join and get all the information from maybe people they know or people they trust more than the media outlets and so on. So I would encourage any of you who have time, access, and will to do it. That would be all.
Thank you, Lukas. Thanos, any short comment on the questions? Do you have something short comment on the questions? Lukas have underlined the necessity of trusting our sources, finding trustful sources.
I'd like to answer the question, how do we know that conspiracy theories are fake? When someone or something gives you an easy answer for a complex problem, take it with a grain of salt. There are no easy answers. There are no magical solutions. We're facing a complex phenomenon. There are a few unknown parameters. So there are no easy answers. So if someone offers an easy solution, whether that is a cure or an explanation why this is happening, just take it with a grain of salt.
Thank you, Thanos. Joan, do you have any short comment?
Government has done a pretty good job of outlining some of the assistance that they've attempted to try to give to Iran. So I wouldn't necessarily discount officials. We have an excellent team in the United States. Many of you have heard of Dr. Fauci, who's now a rock star in medicine. So I do think that, that our officials can be a source. I mean, obviously don't trust everything they say, but they can be a good source. And finally, I think this underscores the importance of really the reputable sources of media around the world, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I mean, these are really strong institutions that do a great job of reporting, and I think generally they can be trusted. And I just want to thank you for this wonderful seminar. It's been great.
We thank you as well. We thank you, all of our speakers, for being here, and I would like to thank you, all of you participating here. Before we leave you, I would like actually to remind you the following, that this is actually the start of a new initiative, an initiative that is actually arranged jointly by our hub from DCN network and World Learning. Actually, it is an effort that aims to strengthen and to elaborate all this digital discussion that goes around the world. It is an effort that it is supported by the U.S. Department of State Office of Citizen Exchanges, the Digital Communication Network. And as that, we will actually continue our webinars, and we would like you to have you with us in our next events. The next event will take place on Thursday at 5 o'clock Greek time. And it will be about how and democracies can tackle actually disinformation, can respond this crisis. It's a major question because it relates with the day after of the coronavirus, or even with the present day. And I would actually like to, and then the next event will take place on Monday, and all these events and the program, you could be informed by following the DCN website that I have shown you, and I will share it with you in a minute actually here. And it is actually the DCN site. It is, you can find more information here by following us actually in our network, and also being part of our group. Digital Communication Network Hub aims to foster cooperation, and this is why we would like you to join this effort that we are doing as part of the larger network of Digital Communication Network. Also, I would like to thank Franak, which is a vice president of digital communication, and someone that actually he's inspiring a lot of us in order to continue doing this work. Plus, I would like to thank Vlad, Anna, Dimitris, Lukas, everyone, and Aaron, and apology if I forget anyone, but all of you that you were behind and supported us in actually being able to realize this first meeting. Franak?